Hello, good evening. I will share my screen and then one of you can unmute and let me know if I'm audible and if my screen is visible. Just a moment. Yeah, so yeah, good evening. Second. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Today is the 12th live session of the series of live sessions, the course Fundamentals of Protein Chemistry, where we basically taken by course instructor Professor Shagota from IIT Kharagpur. And in these live sessions, what we do is that we basically discuss some of the old assignment questions, and we not only discuss the questions and the answers, but we also discuss the concepts behind those questions, so that it's easier for us to solve similar types of other questions, right? So, keeping that in mind, we organize and execute these live sessions, and we want it to be as interactive as possible. So, in case you have any doubt, you can just unmute and let me know, or you can just type in the chat box in case you have mic issues. And if I know the answer at the moment, I'll tell you immediately. If I don't, then you have to give me time, at least 1 week. Sometime I'll tell you in the next class, right? So with that, we'll move on to the first question for today. And then after reading out the question, I'll give you some time, and then we can discuss the answers together. Or maybe if you want to answer, you can let me know the details and the answer with proper explanation, and then I will also discuss the concept behind those questions, right? So we'll start today's session. Okay, so the first question that we have here is, in a density gradient centrifugation, which cellular component would likely be found at the bottom of the tube? Okay, and the options are A. Ribosome, B. Mitochondria, C. Nuclei, and D. Microsome. So I'll give you some time. You can just come up with the answer with proper explanation, and then we'll discuss. You have to tell me the answer, not only the answer but also the. Okay, so the answer will be actually nuclei. I'll tell you. In density gradient centrifugation, cellular components separate based on their size and density, right? So the denser and larger components move further down the tube. Nuclei is the largest and the densest, so it will be at the bottom of the gradient. Mitochondria will be medium large, so it will be middle, below microsomes, above nuclei. Microsomes will be small vesicles from fragmented ER, so they will be in upper middle, and ribosomes will be the smallest, least dense, so they will be at the top, near the top. So nuclei are the heaviest and the densest organelles. So in density gradient centrifugation, they sediment to the bottom of the tube. Okay. So if we discuss about the types of centrifugation, it's basically based on purpose, right? Either it's analytical or preparative. Analytical is measuring the physical properties of the sedimenting particles such as sedimentation coefficient or molecular weight. Preparative would be isolating specific particles which can be reused, right? So in case of analytical ultracentrifugation, what are the applications? Basically for determining sample purity. So this basically you'll be able to handle purest samples using this kind of analytical ultracentrifugation. For characterizing assembly and disassembly mechanisms of biomolecular complexes, for detecting and characterizing macromolecular conformational changes, measuring equilibrium constants and thermodynamic parameters, for self and hetero associating systems, for characterizing the solution state behavior of macromolecules under various conditions. Now, analytical ultracentrifugation, let's talk about the design. So, it's a preparative ultracentrifuge plus optical detection system. So, it will basically measure sample concentration inside the centrifuge cell during or after cell sedimentation. Now, centrifugation parameters and data acquisition under computer control, like experiments lasting many days performed with minimal operator intervention. Okay, so basically, if you can see, this is how the schematic looks like. Now, if we talk about the analytical ultracentrifugation design, what are the optical systems? So, there is an absorbance optical system, basically measurement of sample concentration at wavelengths from 200 to 800 nanometer, detection of macromolecules containing strong chromophores. Then we have the Rayleigh interference optical system, measurement of sample concentration based on refractive index changes, analyzing macromolecules lacking intense chromophores like polysaccharides, and samples that contain strongly absorbing buffer components. Now for preparative cell centrifugation, there are many types. Differential centrifugation like cell fractionation. The process of separation of cell organelles is known as cell fractionation. Now to isolate a specific organelle, the organelles are homogenized in a suitable medium at 4 degrees Celsius, and the resulting suspension is called a homogeneal. Now, fractionation is done by differential centrifugation. This method is based upon the differences in the sedimentation rate of particles of different sizes and density. Now, it uses a series of centrifugation steps at successively greater speeds. Each step yields a pellet and a supernatant. Now, the supernatant from each step is subjected to centrifugation in the next step. It provides basically 4 pellets: nuclear, mitochondrial, lysosomal, and microsomal fractions. At each step, the pellet is washed several times by resuspending in the homo medium, followed by centrifugation under the same conditions. Okay. Now we have the liver tissue homogenization, homogenate, centrifugation, and all of that, if you can see over here, right? So if we take a liver tissue, for example, you homogenize it, homogenate. The centrifuge pellet 1 will be nuclei whole cells. Then recentrifuge supernatant 3000 G for 20 minutes, and pellet 2 will be most mitochondria, some lysosome and peroxisomes. Then recentrifuge supernatant at 15,000 G. Then pellet 3 is mitosome, mitochondria, most lysosome, peroxisomes. It's recentrifuge supernatant at 100,000 G. Then pellet 4 will be rough ER and smooth ER, microsomes and Golgi. Soluble proteins will be the final supernatant. So pellet one is nuclear and whole cells because these are the most dense and most heavy. Now density gradient centrifugation basically uses a medium that has gradients like cesium chloride, cesium sulfate, sodium bromide, calcium glycerol texture. The separation depends upon the Bowen densities of the particles. There can be two types, rate zonal technique and isopycnic technique. In case of rate zonal technique, the gradient used has a maximum density at the bottom, but density is less than the most dense sedimenting particle to be separated, right? So density gradient is shallow. The sample is taken at the top as a zone and centrifugation is performed at low speed for short time. Now, depending on the sedimentation rate, samples from discrete zones and must be terminated before the zones reaching the bottom. If you can see over here. However, the application is useful for separating proteins with nearly identical densities but differing slightly in size, used for separation of RNA DNA hybrids, ribosomal subunits, and subcellular organelles. Now, what is isopycnic centrifugation? Give me a minute. Okay, so it does not depends on the Bowen density of the particle, so it does not depend on shape or size of the particle, right? It's independent of time and maximum density of the gradient always exceeds the density of the densest particle. So at the point of isodensity, no further sedimentation occurs. Okay, so this is how you do. If you see rate zonal centrifugation is a shallow gradient, right? Here isopycnic, it's a steep gradient. Now used to separate particles of similar size and but of different density, and subcellular organelles such as Golgi apparatus and mitochondria can be effectively separated by this method. Now, one of the questions that come up is what is the difference between rate zonal and isopycnic centrifugation? Right? So, anyway, so if we discuss about the difference, it's a classic conceptual point, right? That often causes confusion because both rate zonal and isopycnic centrifugation use density gradients, yet the principle of separation is fundamentally different. So let's go step by step, right? For rate zonal or velocity centrifugation, the principle is that particles are separated based on their size and mass, which is the sedimentation rate, through a preformed density gradient. So all particles are denser than the medium, so they all move downward, but larger and heavier ones move faster. Now, how is it done? A shallow gradient is prepared, like 5 to 20% sucrose. The sample is gently layered on top. Centrifugation is run just long enough for particles to separate by their rate of movement before any reach the bottom. The gradient stabilizes the layers and prevents mixing. Now, what determines separation? Size and shape. Like larger means faster sedimentation. Mass is more massive, faster. Density plays a minor role since all are denser than the medium. The key outcome is each particle forms a distinct band according to its velocity. So if you spin too long, even small particles eventually pellet, right? So typically uses separating macromolecules or organelles of similar densities but different sizes, like ribosomal subunits, 40S versus 60S, virus particles, etc. Now if we talk about the isopycnic centrifugation, the principle is that particles separated based on the Bowen density, independent of size or shape, right? So each particle migrates until it reaches the point in the gradient where the density of the medium equals its own. Then it stops. So how it's done? The sample is mixed evenly with a dense gradient medium like cesium chloride, cesium sulfate or percol, and the steep gradient forms during centrifugation. Okay, the density is often up to 1.9 gram per centimeter cube for cesium chloride, and the centrifuge is run for a long time, like many hours, until equilibrium is reached. Now, what determines separation? Bowen density only. Size does not matter because every particle finds its equilibrium point. So the key outcome is that each component forms a stable band where the particle Bowen density is equal to the medium Bowen density. So the typical use is separation of nucleic acids like DNA, RNA, or 14N, 15N different isotope labeled DNA in the Messelson-Stahl experiment, if you have heard about that experiment. Also for lipoproteins, organelles, and viruses based on the densities and all of that. Right? So the basis of separation in case of rate zonal is sedimentation rate, size, shape, mass. For isopycnic, it's only Bowen density. The gradient in case of rate zonal is preformed shallow, like 5 to 20% sucrose. For isopycnic, it's self-forming or steep, like cesium chloride. For sample placement, rate zonal, it's layered on top of gradient. For isopycnic, mixed uniformly throughout. For centrifugation time, the short before pelleting, for in case of rate zonal. For isopycnic, long until equilibrium reached. For dependence on particle density, minor. For rate zonal, for isopycnic, it's major, the only determining factor. For final state, bands move downward, can pellet in case of rate zonal. For isopycnic, bands stay at equilibrium position. For typical use, macromolecules and organelles in case of rate zonal, DNA, viruses, lipoproteins in case of isopycnic. An example is 40S, 60S ribosome separation in case of rate zonal, and 15N or 14N different N isotope labeled DNA Messelson-Stahl. Okay, so rate zonal is run by size and speed. Isopycnic is like equal density. Okay, so coming back to the basic question, centrifugation is a separation method of different components in an analyte mixture. This method involves the rotation of the sample around a fixed axis, which causes the production of a centrifugal force. Centrifugal force causes the particles in the sample to move down through a liquid medium. This process causes the sedimentation of particles or cells with different sizes and densities at different rates. Right? Now, differential centrifugation is an analytical technique in which we can separate the particles in a mixture depending on the size of the particle. It is the simplest form of centrifugation and also called differential pelleting. This method is important in separating the components in a cell. Now, particles having different sizes undergo sedimentation at different rates upon centrifugation. In other words, large particles sediment faster than smaller particles. Moreover, the sedimentation rate can be increased by increasing the centrifugal force, also known as differential velocity centrifugation. So, differential centrifugation was first introduced by Bensley and Hoare in 1934, who obtained a large granule fraction containing nuclei and mitochondria. Now, differential centrifugation is based upon the differences in the sedimentation rate, as we discussed, of biological particles of different size and density. So, as the increased centrifugal force is applied, initial sedimentation of the larger molecules takes place. Further particles settle down depending upon the speed and time of the individual centrifugation steps in the density and relative size of the particles. And the largest class of particles forms a pellet on the bottom of the centrifuge tube, leaving smaller size structures within the supernatant. So thus larger molecules sediment quickly and at lower centrifugal forces, whereas the smaller molecules take longer time and higher forces. So in the case of particles that are less dense than the medium, the particles will float instead of settling. If you see cell rupturing in a blender and all of that. Sample solution is homogenized in a medium containing buffer. The sample is then placed in the centrifuge tube, which is operated at a particular centrifugal force for a specific time at a particular temperature. By the end of this operation, a pellet will be formed at the bottom of the tube, which is separated from the supernatant. The supernatant is added to a new centrifuge tube where it is centrifuged at another speed for a particular time and particular temperature. And again the supernatant is separated from the pellets formed. So these steps are continued until all particles are separated from each other, and the particles can then be identified by testing for indicators that are unique to the specific particles. right? So see, this first step is homogenization. Tissue cells are homogenized. Then this is supernatant pellet rich in nuclear debris and all of that. So every step of centrifugation, you get the pellet rich in mitochondrial chloroplast cells are from plant, pellet rich in microsomes. Next step is the plasma membrane and cells internal membranes, and pellet rich in ribosomes. It's commonly used for separation of cell organelles and membranes found in the cell. It can also be used for low resolution separation of the nucleus. So as this technique separates particles based on their sizes, it can be used for the purification of extracts containing larger sized impurities. Okay. So basically, we can separate the particles in the analyte mixture based on the density of the particle. Now, this method, substances are concentrated in a solution of cesium salts or in sucrose. And the method involves the fractionation of particles based on the buoyancy density. Right? Buoyancy is basically the ability or the tendency of something to float in water or other liquid. Basically the power of the liquid to keep something afloat. And the density gradient is this method is the cesium salt or the sucrose medium. So it's based on the principle that molecules settle down under centrifugal force until they reach a medium with the density that's same as theirs. In this case, a medium with the density gradient is employed, which either has to decrease in density or increase in density. Now, molecules in a sample move through the medium as the sample is rotated, creating a centrifugal force. The more dense molecules begin to move towards the bottom as they move through the density gradient. And the molecules then become suspended at a point in which the density of the particles equals the surrounding medium. In this way, the molecules with different densities are separated at different layers, which can then be recovered by various processes. Okay, this. Now, steps of density gradient, I have already discussed about the rate zonal and the isopycnic. Basically, the particles travel through the gradient until they reach a point in which the density matches the density of the surrounding medium. And these fractions can be removed and separated, obtaining the particles as isolated units. So during rate zonal, the sample is layered as a narrow zone on top of the density gradient. Particles move at different rates under centrifugal force on the basis of their density, and the actual sedimentation rate primarily depends upon the size and the mass of the particles. As the density of the particles is higher than the density gradient, all particles produce pellets. For isopycnic, second type of density gradient centrifugation method, it starts with a homogeneous solution under the centrifugal force. The particles in the analyte mixture move until the density of the particles is similar to the density gradient. Therefore, we can name this technique as equilibrium centrifugation as well. So, density gradient centrifugation can be applied for the purification of large volumes of molecules. It can even be used for the purification of different viruses, which aids this further studies. This technique can be used both as a separation technique and the technique for the determination of densities of various particles. This method was used in the famous experiment which proved that DNA is semi-conservative by using different isotopes of nitrogen. So differential is basically separation occurs on the basis of particles. Separation occurs based on the density. Differential is to separate cells, organelles, and then density gradient separate molecules or particles. Homogenized organism sample and homogeneous solution is used. No sugar solution, a sucrose or sugar solution. Differential is easy to use. Density is difficult. No contamination occurs. Some contamination might occur in case of density gradient. Now, what is basically cesium chloride and how is it used? So, this technique was discovered by Stahl. So, technique basically uses a density gradient centrifugation that uses cesium chloride as a medium. So, gradient of densities from lowest to highest is formed and component sediment in the layer that corresponds to the densities. A cesium chloride solution is then set up in a centrifuge tube, and the cesium chloride forms a concentration gradient within the tube when centrifuged at high speed with more concentrated cesium chloride towards the base. Because cesium is a very heavy element, a cesium salt solution is much denser than the density of most salt solutions, and the cesium salt solution does not affect viruses or DNA. It is used in centrifugation. Okay. This is the most widely used method for purification of recombinant adenovirus. Since CSCL has a density almost equivalent to that of DNA, it helps in isolating DNA from a sample containing DNA RNA protein. Okay. So cesium chloride is used widely for separating various types of DNA. So analytic centrifugation is separation method when the particles in a sample are separated on the basis of the density and the centrifugal force that they experience. So we have already discussed based on the principle that particles that are denser than others settle down faster. Similarly, the larger molecules move more quickly in the centrifugal force than the smaller ones. And for the determination of the relative molecular mass of a macromolecule can be performed by sedimentation velocity approach or sedimentation equilibrium methodology. And the hydrodynamic properties of macromolecules are described by the sedimentation coefficients. They can be determined from the rate the concentration boundary of the particular biomolecules moves in the gravitational field. Sedimentation coefficient can be used to characterize changes in the size and the shape of the macromolecules with changing experimental conditions. Now, it refers to a very high velocity centrifuge used in the analytical process. It's used in analytical procedures. It is to determine the mass and shape of macromolecules such as protein complexes and the rate of sedimentation molecules. Only small sample volumes can be processed by analytical centrifugation, like almost around 1 ml. Relatively pure samples are used in the analytical centrifugation. A precise sedimentation coefficient and a molecular weight are used in analytical centrifugation, and the process of analytical centrifugation can be observed visually during analytical centrifugation. As high speed generates more heat, a cooling arrangement should be used in the analytical centrifugation. So it's basically commonly used to dimension of properties of biomolecules like proteins and nucleic acids to characterize particle properties such as molecular weight, diffusion and sedimentation coefficients, to allow the determination of the relative molecular mass and all of that we discussed. So coming back to the question that we started with, density gradient centrifugation, the nuclei will be the component, it will be found at the bottom of the tube, right? So now if you wanted a more detailed careful step-by-step detailed explanation, so as I said, it separates particles density gradient centrifugation to separate particles based on their sedimentation behavior, which depends mainly on size, mass and movement density. Now a tube contains a medium whose density varies with position. For example, a sucrose or cesium chloride gradient. Now under centrifugal force, particles move until they reach positions determined by these properties and the grade. Now in grade zonal, you lay a thin sample layer on top of a preformed gradient, lighter at top, heavier at bottom. Particles separate by sedimentation grade. Larger, heavier, move faster towards bottom. Now particles do not cross a region where the medium density equals their Bowen density unless spun so long the collecting occurs. So useful to separate by size and mass. Then the gradient prevents convection and cushions pelleting. Then you have isopycnic centrifugation. The sample is mixed into the gradient substance and spun until each particle migrates to the position where its Bowen density is medium density. Separation is by Bowen density alone, useful for nucleic acids and all of that, and for particles with distant densities. Now, three properties matter the most. Mass, size, inertia. Like larger objects experience a greater centrifugal force and tend to sediment faster. Bowen density. The effective force causing movement is reduced by the displaced medium. If particle density is equivalent to medium density, it stops. Shape and hydration. Non-spherical shape and bound water effectively change effective density and the fraction. Now, nuclei, largest and heaviest organelle in a cell, diameter is usually in micrometer, very dense, chromatin and nuclei envelope and acidic proteins. In regional gradients, nuclei sediment fastest and reach the bottom or form a pellet early. In isopycnic, they still bind at a high density position near the bottom. Therefore, nuclei end up at the bottom. For mitochondria, it's medium size, like 0.5 to 1 to micron, less dense than nuclei. Elements slower than nuclei but faster than microsomes, ribosomes. In a typical differential certification sequence, mitochondria will pellet at moderate, like 10,000, 15,000 G. In gradients, they form bands above nuclei. For microsomes, not natural organelles but membrane vesicles formed when endoplasmic reticulum fragments during homogenization. The small vesicles tends to 100 to 100 nanometer, lower effective density than mitochondria, band in upper to middle regions of gradients. Then we have ribosomes, very small macromolecular complexes, 70S in prokaryotes, 80S in eukaryotes, each has characteristic sedimentation coefficients, much lower mass and density relative to organelles. In gradients, they remain near the top or in lighter fractions. In sucrose gradients, ribosomal subunits form distinct bands. Now, for workflow context, differential derivation crude stepwise spins and increasing G forces separate nuclei first at low speed, then mitochondria, then microsomes, then ribosomes. This is not an necessary gradient but helps conceptualize relative sedimentation. Like 600 G is enough for nuclei pellet, for 10,000 G needs for mitochondria pellet, 100,000 G for microsomes pellet, and ultracentrifugation needed for ribosomal pellets or gradients. For density, it refines separation. Heavier nuclei move furthest down. Mitochondria form distinct bands above. Microsomes and ribosomes stay higher. So, in density classification, the largest, densest organelle, the nuclei, will experience the largest net outward centrifugal force relative to the friction and buoyancy, so it sediments the farthest and is found at the bottom of the tube. The other options, mitochondria, microsomes, and ribosomes, are progressively smaller and are less dense and therefore remain at positions high up in the gradient. Higher up in the gradient, basically. Okay. Okay. Anybody has any questions regarding any queries regarding this question? I'll wait for a few minutes and we'll move to the next question. If you have any queries, you can ask now. Anybody? Okay, no further queries on this question. We'll move on to the next question for today. What is the primary role of SDS in SDS page? Okay, so I'll repeat the question once. What is the primary role of SDS in SDS page? A. To maintain protein structure. B. To denature proteins and give them a uniform negative charge. C. To increase protein stability. Or D. To act as a molecular weight marker. I'll wait for a few minutes. You can just give me the answer with proper explanation and then we'll move on to the next slide. Anybody? Okay, so the answer basically will be option B, to denature proteins and to give them a uniform negative charge. You see, SDSP stands for sodium dodecyl sulfate polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis. It is basically a common technique used to separate proteins based on their molecular weight, right? Now, SDS is an anionic detergent, negatively charged. Okay, so chemical formula will be CH3, CH3, CH2, whole 11, OSO3, Na, OSO3 minus Na plus. It is a long hydrophobic tail and a negatively charged sulfate head. Okay. Now, what are its function? A is protein denaturation because SDS disrupts non-covalent bonds like hydrogen bonds, hydrophobic interactions, van der Waals forces. This causes the protein to unfold into a linear polypeptide chain, that is, loss of secondary, tertiary, and quaternary structures. It imparts a uniform negative charge, like SDS molecules coat the unfolded protein backbone at roughly 1 SDS molecule per 2 amino acid residues, and this overwhelms the protein's intrinsic charge due to amino acid side chains, giving each protein an approximately uniform charge to mass ratio. Now, it also enables size-based separations. How? Because all proteins have a similar negative charge per unit mass now, their movement during electrophoresis depends only on molecular size. Smaller proteins will move faster through the gel pores. So, the first option which says maintain protein structure, that's absolutely wrong because SDS actually disrupts or destroys native structure. Third option is to increase protein solubility. That is wrong because SDS denatures and destabilizes the folded proteins. The fourth option is to act as a molecular weight marker. No. It is a part of the buffer. The latter or marker proteins serve as molecular weight standards. So SDS denatures proteins and coats them with a uniform negative charge per unit mass. Ensuring the separation in SDS phase depends only on molecular weight or protein size. Okay, so if you see, basically it provides a means to look at the proteins in a gel simultaneously. So electrophoretic mobility of proteins depends on its molecular weight because we know DNA is negatively charged, right? But we cannot say all proteins are negatively charged. It basically depends on the amino acids in them. But what SDS does is that SDS basically destroys the tertiary structure of the protein. It basically destroys the disulfide bonds. So now the proteins are in a their primary structure, only amino acid chain. Now it basically imparts uniform negative charge. So now that all proteins are imparted uniform negative charge per unit mass, they separate only according to their size. So the main questions that come up are: what principles govern the separation of proteins by SDS page? How does one prepare and run SDS page gels? And how are SDS page gels analyzed? So these are the main questions that come up, and this topic is actually very relevant, very relevant for lab activities because SDS page is a very uh, convenient and relevant lab technique that people do almost molecular biology labs do almost on a regular basis. So these are the basically three key conceptual pillars of SDS page. Let's go through them one by one. So it is the principle governing separation. So as I said, SDS page separates denatured proteins based on molecular weight, not charge or shape. Now, denaturation. SDS is an anionic detergent, disrupts non-covalent interactions and folding proteins into linear chains. Now, SDS binds to the polypeptide backbone. Okay. So SDS basically disrupts the non-covalent interactions. There is also beta mercaptoethanol or DDT in the buffer, which basically disrupts the disulfide bonds. Now, SDS binds to the polypeptide backbone, one SDS molecule per 2 amino acids, giving all proteins an almost equal charge to mass ratio. Now, when an electric field is applied, all proteins move towards the positive electrode or the anode. Now, since charge differences are neutralized by SDS, the migration rate depends only on the size. The smaller proteins migrate faster through the gel matrix. So, what is the role of the gel matrix of polyacrylamide? It basically acts like a molecular sieve. Pore size depends on the acrylamide concentration. So, low percentage gel means larger pores, separates larger proteins. Higher percentage gel means smaller pores, separates smaller proteins. Now the preparation and running of SDS page gels. Now if you prepare the gel, the stacking, it basically is a discontinuous two gel system. The stacking gel which is at the top will be of 4 to 5% and the resolving gel can be 8 to 15% depending on the protein size you want to resolve and separate. Now what are the key reagents for polymerization? Acrylamide plus bisacrylamide, they form the polyacrylamide network. Then APS or ammonium persulfate, they are initiator of free radicals, and TEMERA, tetramethylene ethylene diamine, basically accelerates polymerization. Now, how do you prepare the sample? Each protein sample is mixed with SDS-based sample buffer or Lamley buffer containing SDS, which denatures proteins and gives negative charge. Beta-1-caprotenol or DDT, which basically breaks disulfide bonds, and glycerol basically increases sample density to make it sink in wells and not come out and diffuse. Right? Bromophenol blue, which basically is a tracking dye to monitor electrophoresis progress, and trace buffer, which basically maintains pH. Now samples are boiled at 95 degrees Celsius for 3 to 5 minutes to ensure complete denaturation. Now we all assemble the gel in the electrophoresis tank and fill with running buffer, trace glycine. Now we load samples and a protein molecular weight marker in separate vials. We run the gel, low voltage through the stacking gel. Now higher voltage through the resolving gel. Now after electrophoresis, the gel is visualized and analyzed. Step 1 will be staining. To see the protein bands, use one of the following stains like Kumasi Brilliant Blue R250. It's the most common, detects microgram levels of proteins. Silver stain is the more sensitive, nanogram levels can be detected. Fluorescent stains are used for imaging with scanners. Next, step 2 is destaining. Remove excess background stain, example with methanol and acetic acid and solution to reveal clear protein bands. Step 3 will be interpretation. Now compare each band's position to the protein ladder to estimate molecular weight. The smaller proteins migrate faster down the gel. The intensity of band roughly correlates with the amount of protein present. Now, further analysis can be done by Western blotting, which basically transfers separated proteins from a gel to the membrane for antibody detection, or densitometry, quantify band intensity using imaging software, or cutting gel mass like Excise and Digest for mass spectrometry. Right? So, as I said, it's basically detergent which denatures proteins by binding to the hydrophobic regions. All non-covalent bonds will be disrupted and the proteins acquire a net negative charge. A concurrent treatment with the disulfide reducing agents such as beta-mercaptolithanol or DDT, which further denatures the proteins by reducing the disulfide bond linkages, is overcoming some forms of tertiary protein folding and breaking up the quaternary protein structure. So the protein samples are having uniform structure and size. Separation will depend on their molecular weight only. Now small proteins migrate faster through the gel under the influence of the applied electric field. The number of SDS molecules that bind is proportional to the size of the protein. Thereby in the electrical field, protein molecules move towards the anode and separated only according to the molecular weight. So this is how the schematic looks like. If you see SDS coated large proteins migrate slowly through the gel and small proteins migrate quickly through the gel. The nearer the band to the well, the larger the molecular size of the protein. Okay. So this is a technique widely used in biochemistry, forensics, genetics and molecular biology to separate and identify proteins according to their molecular weight. Now this method separates proteins based primarily on their molecular weights. So if you see single subunit protein, folded protein with intrinsic charge, proteins with two subunits joined by disulfide bonds, Denatured protein with uniform negative charge and loading onto the gel. Now the protein samples are having uniform structure and charge. Separation will depend on their molecular weight only. Now, SDS treated proteins have very similar charge to mass ratio and similar shapes. During pairs, the rate of migration of SDS treated proteins is effectively determined by molecular weight. So small proteins migrate faster through the gel under the influence of applied electric field, whereas large proteins successively retarded due to the sieving effect of the gel. So we know by now what is SDs, negatively charged detergent sodium disulfate used to denature and renalize the proteins. Both the proteins with uniform negative charge. So this is before SDs, this is after SDs. If you can see, proteins are thus prepared by boiling in the presence of SDs. Heat, basically SDs and heat will impart a constant charge to mass ratio to the protein. Only SDs. Now proteins folded with positive and negative charge. The disulfide bonds are reduced by beta mercaptan or DTD. Is this negative charge unfolded to a linear structure with negatively charged proportional to the polypeptide chain length. Now proteins are separated based on the polypeptide chain length by electrophoresis in the polyacrylamide gel with an appropriate mesh size. If you see, the samples are loaded over here. This is stacking gel and the running gel or the resolving gel. This is a loading. And it's basically differentiated into two systems, continuous SDS page and discontinuous SDS page. Now its polyacrylamide is used to form a gel, a matrix of pores which allow the molecules to migrate at different rates. Now polyacrylamide size of pores is determined by the concentration of the acrylamide. The higher the concentration, the smaller the size of the pores. The discontinuous SDS page consists of two different gels, stacking gel of 5% acrylamide and separating gel or the resolving or the running gel, which range from 8 to 15% of acrylamide depending on the protein size you want to separate. Now, why polyacrylamide is used for gel? Chemically inert, electrically neutral, hydrophilic, transparent for optical detection. Now, gels are cross-linked matrices of acrylamide polymers. If you see over here, N-methylene bisacrylamide cross-linking monomer. Acrylamide monomer. The free radicals initiate a vinyl polymerization reaction, ammonium persulfate or TMAID. So unreacted acrylamide and bisacrylamide monomers are neurotoxins. So polyacrylamide is inert. Moving on. Now, discontinuous gels are stacking and running gels with different compositions. If you see, the main difference is in the pH. If you see, the stacking gel has a pH of 6.8, whereas running gel has a pH of 8.8. And stacking gel has larger pores, lower ionic strength, where the running gel has smaller pores, higher ionic strength. Now, ionization of glycine in the running buffer is the key to protein separation. Both amine and carboxyl groups are charged in stacking gel. Okay. Now, because pH 6.8, amino group loses some positive charge in the running gel, pH 8.8. So, what happens at the start? Running buffer is to glycine SDs, pH 8.3. The protein samples are loaded here. Bromophenol blue in the sample buffer will act as a tracking dye. Now, here voltage is applied. Chloride ions in the stacking gel buffer move rapidly to the positive pole. Proteins are negatively charged and run at various rates through the stacking gel. Glycine moves more slowly than the proteins since very few glycine molecules have a negative charge. Differential migration of the chloride with the glycine sets up a potential difference that helps to concentrate the proteins. Proteins stack up at the interface between the two gels. Glycine amino groups lose the proton as they enter the running gel. Now, glycine, now negatively charged, moves more rapidly than proteins in the pH of the running gel. So, migration of proteins is in running gel is inversely proportional to their log molecular weight. The polyacrylamide gel is formed by the copolymerization of acrylamide and cross-linking by N-methylene bisacrylamide. To polymerize the gel system consisting of ammonium persulfate is an initiator of free radicals and tetramethylene ethylene diamine is added, which is timid. This is the formation of polyacrylamide gel. If you see how free radical catalyst from acrylamide to bisacrylamide. So the pH is 6.8 over here and 8.8 over here. This is the separation. This is sample. This is schematic of how you assemble. Basically, you assemble the gel casting mold and not to leave any space. Then you assemble gel casting. Here you see polyacrylamide solution for separating gel and all of that. When you heat the the sample to family buffer and heat it. Then you basically assemble the system. You remove the comb and you assemble the system. Everything is solidified. Then you start loading the gel. After the gel has been run, you remove the gel assembly from the electrolysis apparatus and subsequent analysis preparation. So longer periods researching male species at either edge that will generate a 1 millimeter separation between the assembled plates. Second plate is shorter but has the same width as the spacer plate. This is a casting film. You clip it. You remove the comb after the sample of solution has solidified. Gel has solidified. You add running buffer to the upper and the lower reservoirs. You load the samples. Connect to power supply and let the tracking layer and the proteins run. So types of stains can be Kumasi blue, which is traditional method requires staining followed by de-staining to remove background gel staining, most common and least sensitive. Limited to 100 nanogram of protein. Below that, I don't think this can see monitor. Silver stain, most sensitive test, detection limit 0.1 to 1 nanogram of protein. Proteins are visualized in Kumasi brilliant blue. This is how you plot it. This is migrated log of molecular weight. So lesser decrease this is migrated means more molecular weight. More decrease migrated is lower molecular weight. Applications are very simple. Purity, molecular weight of protein identifies the sulfate bonds between protein, quantifying proteins, blotting applications, all of that, so on and so forth. So coming back to the question we started with, basically is used to denature proteins and give them a uniform negative charge. Now I'll wait for a few minutes. If you have any queries, you can ask me. Anybody has any questions? I'll give a break, then we'll move on to the next question for today. Okay, then we'll move on to the next question for today. What is the primary? Next question is, what is the primary function of IPTG in recombinant protein expression? Option A, to lyse bacterial cells. Option B, to induce protein expression. Option C, to inhibit protein degradation. Option D, to act as a molecular weight marker. I'll wait for a few minutes for your answer, then we'll discuss the answer. First, you tell me what is IPDG, what is the full form of IPDG, then we'll move on to the answering the question. Anybody? Anyone IPDG? So basically, IPDG helps in protein expression. IPDG stands for isopropyl beta D1 thiogalactopyranoside, and it plays a crucial role in inducing recombinant protein expression, especially in bacterial systems such as E. coli that uses the lac operon or the T7 expression system, right? Like the pet vector. So what is IPTG? IPTG is nothing but a synthetic analog of lactose. It can bind to and inactivate the repressor LAC-I just like lactose, but is not metabolized by the cell. So meaning its concentration stays constant throughout induction. What is the normal without IPTG? LAC repressor protein LAC-I binds to the LAC operator region on DNA. This blocks transcription of downstream genes like LAC-Z or your recombinant gene clone under the LAC or T7 promoter. IPTG then enters the bacterial cell. IPTG binds to LAC-I and changes the shape. The repressor dissociates from the LAC operator sequence. This allows RNA polymerase or T7 RNA polymerase in T7 systems to access the promoter. The gene of interest is transcribed and translated, leading to protein expression. Now, why IPTG is preferred? Because unlike galactose, IPTG is not hydrolyzed by beta-galactosidase. So, this induction remains steady and long-lasting, giving high and consistent expression levels. Now, here are the options. If you see, option A is to lyse bacterial, that is incorrect because IPTG does not lyse cells. Lysis is done later by sonication, lysozyme, etc. Option B to induce protein expression, that is correct. IPTG induces gene transcription by inactivating the LAC repressor. To inhibit protein degradation, that is wrong. Protein degradation is prevented using protease inhibitors like IPTG. Inhibitors, not IPTG. D is to act as a molecular weight marker. Molecular weight markers are known standard proteins unrelated to IPTG. So basically, in summary, IPTG acts as an inducer of gene expression in LAC or T7 based expression systems by inactivating the LAC repressor, allowing transcription of the recombinant gene. So expression plasmids basically are used for gene expression. Expression vectors must contain a promoter sequence as well as a transcription terminator sequence of the inserted gene. Now, protozoa protein expression systems, there are many: cell-free, bacterial, yeast, mammalian cell culture, insect, etc. Now, protein expression in bacterial advantages: fast growth, cheap medium and equipment for growing good knowledge of the host. What are the disadvantages? Limitation for expression of eukaryotic proteins due to different frequencies with which the different codons appear in genes of these organisms. Low yield of protein, synthesized codon, optimized version of gene. Differences in post-translational modifications. May have to use eukaryotic cells. Now, what are the goals? To obtain as much product as possible, soluble, correctly folded protein in a form that is easy to purify. Common problems from these goals: danger of aggregation, decreased cell growth, need inducible expression. The expressed protein may be difficult to separate from E. coli protein. It needs a tag on separate expressed protein to facilitate separation. Now, this is genetic element essential for expression. If you see the promoter operator, RNA ribosomal binding site, RBS, ATG, this is a start codon, gene stop terminator, replication origin or ORI, and antibiotic resistance selectable marker. So, operator is basically a segment of DNA that binds a repressor, allowing tight regulation of expression. Now, RBS is a ribosomal binding site, a sequence of mRNA that is bound by the ribosome when initiating protein translation. A region of 6-7 nucleotides upstream of the start codon in AUG in prokaryotes, a Shine-Dalgarno sequence. So, RBS start and stop, if you see. Now, what are the functional steps of the state of the LAC operator in a wild type E. coli growing in the absence of lactose? If you see here, it's the E. coli chromosome segment. This is a promoter, LAC regulatory gene, LAC-I operator. Now, if you see repressor mRNA ribosomes translation, so repressor proteins attach to operator and prevent transcription of mRNA. RNA polymerase can bind to promoter when repressor is bound to operator but cannot initiate transcription. So, LAC regulatory gene, promoter, terminator, operator. beta-galactosidase gene, permease gene, transacetylase gene. So, signal promoter controls three genes, LAC-Z, LAC-Y, and LAC-A. Okay. So, a repressor coded by the separate gene LAC-I can bind to the operator and block transcription. Now, if lactose is present, it binds to the repressor, which stops it from blocking transcription. Now, glucose must be absent. A separate regulatory mechanism controls the binding of RNA polymerase to the promoter. If glucose is present, there is little cyclic AMP. So the operator activator complex cap cyclic AMP cannot bind to the promoter region. This is called catabolite repression. Using F prime plasmid, it is possible to construct cells that have two copies of the LAC operon, one on the plasmid and one on the chromosome, that allows genetic tests for gene interactions. Now, some practice. This is all of even more practice. So another way to summarize the LAC operon. Northern blot. We are not discussing the DRP operon, that is basically two regulatory systems, repression and attenuation. Repressor is activated by tryptophan. The effector molecule changes shape so it can bind to the operator. The repressor protein is produced by another gene far away, 70s reduction in synthesis. If you see over here, this is the organization of the controlling sites and the net structural genes of the E. coli TRP operon. TRP is tryptophan. So that is second regulatory mechanism that can fine-tune production of TRP or tryptophan. So attenuation depends on interaction between transcription and translation in the leader sequence at the beginning of the operon. 10x variation in transcription. So, four regions of the TRP operon leaded mRNA and the alternate secondary structures they can form by complementary base pairing. These are the models of the attenuation of the TRP operon at E. coli. TRP starved in tryptophan starvation or at low levels of tryptophan, ribosome translating leaders transcripts also TRP codon. Okay, attenuation. Gene regulation is important for determining developmental patterns. Like bacteriophage lambda is a simple place to start. So different sets of genes determine whether the phage will be lytic or lysogenic. The principles are similar to bacterial gene regulation. Example of genetic switch, example of sequential regulatory series. Basically, it's a balance between two activators, CRO and C2, determines which life cycle prevails. Early genes activate middle genes, which activate the late genes. Environmental conditions of the cell can trigger a switch by activating the abundance of C2. So, if you're interested to learn this in detail, please go through the Watson and Crick, Watson molecular biology book. Okay, not Watson and Crick. This is a map of the bacteriophage lambda showing the major genes. If you see, basically it's a balance between the C2 and the CRO genes and all of that. So there are two competing pathways. Basically, phage growth begins when RNA polymerase binds early promoters PL and PR, making mRNA for N and CRO genes. Throughout figure, if you see over, inactive promoters are these pink are inactive promoters and yellow are active promoters. Now, N protein acting at three sites extends RNA synthesis to other genes. O and P proteins permit DNA synthesis to begin. C2 protein is made and acts as shown below, if you see over here. Now, two competing pathways occur towards lysogen development, dominance of repressor, or towards lytic development, dominance of CRO. So, C2 protein stimulates synthesis of mRNA and PRE from PRE for suppressor C1 gene and from PN for integrase INT gene. Now, sufficient repressor binds OR and OL. RNA synthesis, blocking RNA synthesis, repressor bound to OR. Stimulates synthesis of more repressor, integrase promotes integration of phage DNA, lysogen is established. For lytic development and dominance of CRO, protein operates occupies operators OR and OL, preventing synthesis of repressor mRNA but allows enough rightward transcription for Q protein to accumulate. Now, Q protein stimulates late gene transcription. These genes encode structural proteins that package DNA into new fast particles. Now, what is genetic switch? OR has two binding sites and two promoters that go in opposite directions. C1 prefers one side, OR1, which blocks late genes. CRO prefers OR3, which blocks the repressor and the promotes late genes. Okay, so how does the lac repressor bind DNA? If you see over here, dental helix, second alpha helix. So lac and repressor, helix and helix. This is C, the external structure of the lac repressor tetramer bound to 221 base pair segments of DNA. Now, how does the repressor work? It binds to the operator. If lactose is present, a little bit of allolactose is made. Allolactose binds to the repressor and changes its shape, so it no longer binds the DNA. Now, proteinization purification. Why do we decide to purify a protein? First of all, what do we know about the protein? What is the most abundant and cheap source? Organism, tissue, subcellular organization. How much protein do we need? How pure is it to purify the protein from natural sources? What is the abundance, stability, molecular weight, acidic point, function, activity, isoforms, contaminant, protein, scheme of purification, all of them. Now, what is the native source? The gene is not available, naturally abundant in the source. The expression in the recombinant system is complex, like during purification of multiple complexes of proteins. The recombinant protein is low abundance, hard to purify from natural source. Genetic analysis, protein structural function analysis of a domain. Now, to obtain a recombinant protein, obtain the cDNA clone, decide on the expression system and purification scheme, optimize the expression, purify the protein, protein characterization, and quality control. Now, to obtain a recombinant protein, you have to buy the clone, design the primers, PCR amplification of the cDNA sequence. You have to select the corresponding vector, insert the cDNA amplified into the selected vector. Now, for subcloning for overexpression, prokaryote systems that are used fast, cheap, and high throughput, obviously most common, Escherichia coli or E. coli. Eukaryotic systems are expensive, laborious, high fidelity, natural post-translation modification like yeast yield 15 gram per liter, slow growth secreted protein post-translation modifications, insect cells secretory pathway, high level of expression, glycosylation patterns, disulfide bonds, closer resemblance to mammalian cells. Mammalian cells, high fidelity for post-translation modifications, expensive, low yield. These are some post-translational modifications like proteolytic cleavage, glycosylation, secretion, etc. So, in case of prokaryotic cells, the antibiotic will select the cells which are transformed, that is using the selectable marker, the induction of the protein expression, addition of inducer IPTG lactose, the protein expression, centrifugation to collect the cells, cell lysis, protein purification. Now, insect cells, baculovirus expression flow, all of these will not go into too much detail. So, what is the protein purification step by step process? Homogenization, prepare cell-free extract, adjust conditions of buffer, pH, salt, temperature, presence of proteases like absorption to surface, denaturation, air-water interface, storage 80 and 196 Celsius. Stability. The centrifugation removes membrane, nuclei, large organelles to follow the protein through the purification process. Protein content, absorbance at 2-8 nanometer or Bradford-Lowry. Delicate the activity, coupled enzymatic reactions, immunoassays, Western blot, electrophoresis, STA speech, and all of that. To follow the purification steps to electrophoresis, SDS page, electrophoresis methods are used to purify protein. Now, molecular weights, so protein characteristics like solubility, pH, salt, temperature, solvent, salting out, so ion charge, ion exchange chromatography, polarity, hydrophobic interaction chromatography, reverse phase chromatography, affinity chromatography, gel filtration chromatography, all of these. Ammonium sulfate precipitation, column chromatography, all of these. Now separation by precipitation. Salting or separates proteins by the solubility. Low salt concentration increases the protein solubility. Salting in has a higher concentration in hydrophobic interactions, protein precipitation, salting out. A competition between the added salt ions and other dissolved solutes for molecules of solvents. Depending on the hydrophobic protein composition, protein precipitates at different salt concentrations. Like salt, multiple charged anions, ammonium sulfate, phosphate, citrates, etc. Ammonium sulfate is low cost, low solubility, high solubility that varies very little with the temperature. Stabilize most of the proteins and most protein precipitates 20 to 80% reduce lipid content of the sample and all of that. The precipitates can be redissolved in small volume concentration. Protein precipitated contains salt, redissolved protein against low salt buffer dialysis. You know about fractionation. Add salt to reduce saturation, self extract, centrifuge, remove the supernatant. Add salt to 40% saturation, centrifuge, remove supernatant. This is called salting out. Now, dialysis also lowers salt concentration in a protein solution and separates small and large molecules. Okay, now dialysis protocol for increasing salt concentration from 1 molar to lesser than 1 millimolar. So dialysis and single chain would be sufficient even without complete equilibrium. Or we can do column chromatography. After the initial fractionation steps, we move to column chromatography. So the mixture of substances proteins to be fractionated is dissolved in a liquid or gaseous fluid called the mobile phase. This solution is passed through a column consisting of a porous solid matrix called the stationary phase. These are sometimes called resins when used in liquid chromatography. Now, the stationary phase has certain physical and chemical characteristics that allow it to interact in various ways with different proteins. Common types of chromatographic stationary phases are ion exchange chromatography, anion chromatography, cation exchange, hydrophobic, silation, gel filtration, specific affinity. We discussed all of these in one of the last classes. This is a general chromatography protocol. Okay. Basically, ion exchange resins contain charged groups like acidic interact with negatively charged proteins and are called anion exchangers. Like DEAE cellulose diethyl aminoethyl anion exchanger. Ion exchange resins contain charged groups like basic interact with positively charged proteins and are called cation exchanges. Like CM cellulose carboxymethyl cation exchanger. For protein binding, the pH is fixed, usually near neutral under salt concentrations. Conditions exchange cation exchange column after sodium chloride increase. Protein C will come off the bead. Positively charged proteins bind to the column. So after sodium chloride is higher, protein C is released and flows out. So gel filtration mix of the proteins of different molecular weights, porous molecular polymer beads. So molecular mass of the smallest molecule unable to penetrate the pores of the gel is at the exclusion limit. Exclusion limit is a function of molecular shape since elongated molecules are less likely to penetrate a gel pore than other shapes. And not elution volume is basically the volume of solvent required to elute a given solute from the column after it has first contacted the gel. Relative elution volume or VE by V0 is the behavior of a particular solute on a given gel that is independent of the size of the column, and this effectually means that the molecules with molecular masses ranging below the exclusion limit of a gel will elute from a gel in order of their molecular masses with the largest eluting first. Affinity chromatography basically a ligand, a molecule that specifically matches the protein of interest. For example, you have a mixture of proteins, you have an net support and are ligand. Unwanted proteins, the affinity protein showing affinity will bind. Elute with competitive ligand. Some ligands that will bind to this with a stronger force, stronger interaction than this, so remove from competitive ligand by dialysis. Okay. For example, immunoaffinity chromatography, monoclonal antibodies can be attached to the column material. The column only binds the protein against which the antibody has been raised, 10,000-fold purification in a single step. Disadvantage is difficult to produce monoclonal antibodies, harsh conditions to elute the bound protein. When a recombinant protein is expressed, the specific tag is added for the later purification, GST, GSH. Saccharose 6 his tag, all of that. So GST tag can be used in any expression system, his tag can be used in any expression system. GST high yields of pure product, same for his. Selection of purification products available for any scale. Site specific proteases enable cleavage of tag if required. These protease vectors enable cleavage. Small tag may not need to be removed. Purification is single step. The fusion partner can be used directly as an antigen in antibody production. GST tag is detected using an enzyme assay or an immunoassay. 6 tag is detected using an immunoassay. Simple purification, very mild elution conditions. Simple purification, but elution conditions are not as minimizing risk of the damage to functionality and mild as for GST fusion proteins. Neutral pH, but imidazole may cause precipitation. So dissolving to remove imidazole may be unnecessary. GC tag helps stabilize folding of recombinant proteins. 6 is dihydrofolate reductase tag stabilizes small peptides during expression. Fusion proteins may form dimers, whereas small tag is less likely to interfere with structure and function of fusion partner, and mass determination by mass spectrometry not always accurate for some 6 is fusion proteins. Other chromatography methods can be HIC or hydrophobic interaction chromatography. The stationary field is hydrophilic. Agarose gel with substituted hydrophobic groups. Interactions with column are relatively weak and can be used for separation of native protein or denatured, so proteins are separated based on surface hydrophobicity. Reverse phase chromatography or RPC separates nonpolar substances including denatured proteins. Stationary phase is nonpolar and the mobile phase is a more polar liquid used to separate lipids but can also be used for proteins. Solvent must be highly nonpolar, usually high concentration of organic solvent, acetonitrile, so denatures proteins so that the hydrophobic cores can interact with the matrix. High performance liquid chromatography may be based on absorption and exchange, has exclusion, HIC or RPC, but is improved because of the non compressible matrix. What are the advantages? High resolution, fast, high sensitivity can be easily automated. Okay, so I'm not going. I will upload these slides. I will not go into much of the details as I have already discussed. This is from an NPTEL course. I've given appropriate credit. So I will upload these slides. You can maybe have a look at this. I'll upload the video. I'll upload these slides. Okay. Coming back to the question that we started with. What is the primary function of IPTG in recombinant protein expression? It will be to induce protein expression. Okay. I'll wait for a few minutes. If you have any queries, you can ask me. Anyone, any questions? Anybody, any questions? If not, we can stop the session and we'll meet next time in the next live session, which is the extra session. Anything tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. So we can leave. Thank you. Okay. So if you have no more questions, we'll stop the session.